We are a third of the way through your AFL Fantasy season. Can you believe it? Whether you've had a slow start or you're trying to stay ahead of the pack, this week we've got another 10 trade targets for you in AFL Fantasy to hopefully get you one step closer to that completed side and feeling like you're ready to attack the back two-thirds of 2025. My number one target is, in my eyes, the best downgrade option for the week, Jed Busslinger. Beggars can't be choosers, can we? I know a score of 42 isn't amazing, but there's a couple of reasons why I think he's probably the best downgrade option and why he's my number one trade target. Number one, despite him not scoring well, a 42 is not anything we want anywhere near on field. It is a player in a position that while we have the utility available to us, we're probably ready to start freeing up some of that cash from our kind of topped out rookies, the Reeds, the Pryors, the trainers, even a Connor Stone, who might have a little bit more to cash. In fact, they all probably do. But if you're trying to get into an upgrade cadence this week as well, Jed provides that avenue. The second thing is he gives you is, I think, a little bit of confidence that he'll be picked this week, and not too many people under 250, let alone under 300 or $350,000. Do we have that level of trust in? Yes, there's others we hope that might get picked, the Smileys, the Boxshells, just to name a few. But the reality is the Bulldogs won and won well on the weekend, and the Giants aren't exactly lacking in quality tools. The likes of Cadman's a number one pick. Hogan won the Coleman last year, and Riccardi is more than serviceable. So to do that, I can't see Bevo making any changes. He'll get at least this week and hopefully a couple more. A break even of 13 just means we might, if we can get lucky, get as much as kind of $80,000 to $100,000 out of him over the next fortnight. That's a stretch, I know, but that would be the dream, wouldn't it? He's got good VFL pedigree. Hopefully some matchups over the next couple of weeks that aren't as chaotic with the volume of quality tools that they're coming up against might just mean we could get him up to that 350,000 and all of a sudden it's worthwhile. But regardless, beggars can't be choosers. If you're looking for a downgrade, he is probably the best option for me this week. That's why I've got Jed Busslinger. Jed, not Jess. Come on, maybe he's got a sister. I don't know. Let's go to my number two option for the week. It is Harry Sheezel. I know there are some others that people are interested in there and we can talk about them. But what I like about Harry is the upcoming fixture. They've got Essendon and Brisbane over the next couple of weeks. Then they roll into Richmond, Collingwood, and then they come into the West Coast Eagles. So I love this fixture for them. And I also love that he's now playing behind the ball. This seems to be a lot more normative, especially once a George Wardlaw has returned to the side. With Harry Sheezel scoring a decent amount last week against one of the more restrictive teams in Port Adelaide, it gives me some confidence that as he comes up against other teams that don't have that level of restriction or don't have that stopper in that defensive half where Sheezel's going to get the monopoly of the ball, I'm pretty confident. So, yeah, you could go others, but to me, Harry Sheezel is the premium defender that for the 44% of us that don't have him, we want our share on. The only flag I'll wave here outside of the potential positional movement, and again, by the way, hasn't dropped under 90 all year, so it's not exactly like it's a disaster if you get him despite him having a little bit of a stretch break even based on what we've seen this year. Probably the biggest flag outside of that is just that round 12 bye and whether or not you're happy with that from your unique team structural piece. It looks like we'll get a Connor Rosie that'll pick up defensive status in a couple of weeks too, so that might add or free up some of that pain. We'll have to wait and see. But to me, I want Harry Sheezel in my side, and I think this week is as good as any to be able to get your hands on Harry and maybe even a sneaky little VC option. My number three trade target is very much in that same range. Can you see a theme? But number one, talking about the best downgrade, is probably getting some money off the likes of Reed, Trainer, Pryor. And then number one upgrade is Sheezel. My number two being my number three. Let's not confuse you at all. But the third best option for a trade this week, Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera. He was exceptional on the weekend, and I love the way that he's being utilised by his coach, unlike what others might be thinking about the coach this week. I just love that he wants to put Nazih in game-changing positions. We saw in Gatherand, he went forward of the ball to kick goals and impacted the game. We've seen him at times spend quarters through the midfield, and yet again we saw it on this weekend just gone, that he loves to inject Nazih where he can have the greatest impact in a game. He's using his silky skills. He's setting up the play. He's rebounding out of defensive 50 when he's needed there. He's winning clearances. While we don't get reward for that in any kind of score bump in AFL Fantasy, it just means when he's getting his hands on the ball and the rest of his Saints are, he's scoring incredibly well. I really like this as a pick. If you want to not spend up as much on Harry, maybe you like the matchups a little bit more, maybe you're already a Sheezel owner, for example, then Naz to me is a fantastic pick. The fact that he's only in 17% of teams at the moment does feel criminally underrated. And I think if we can start to just have the one defender rook on field, I know Trainer and Reed have scored fine at times prior as well. We just need to go back a week ago from where we are to remind ourselves that we can get some sub 40 scores very easily out of these key position defenders. I want to get out of them. Bice, I'm happy to roll with through the buy, but I think we've got a downgrade option down back and a couple of nice upgrades. And for me, Naz is one of those. Maybe you don't need to upgrade in your defensive lines this week, and perhaps you're just looking at your ruck division and thinking, when is the time to move? Last week probably wasn't the week in AFL Fantasy to diverge away from a Tom De Koning. Maybe this could be the week. My number 4 trade target is Tristan Cherry, and for many, it'd be via the pathway of a Tom De Koning. Tom's looking a bit sore, not going to lie, and he's also got, at least based off the data we've seen this year, with one exception really, a pretty tough matchup in a Riley O'Brien. But for Tristan, he took a tough matchup last week and absolutely smoked it. And it's as good a run now. It really does start to open up. All the variables have landed the way of non-owners, with a tough fixture combining with a little bit of an injury niggle that he got against the Crows in round 3. But now he seems to have worked through both the fixture and his health, and he's absolutely flying. Under $1 million. He's dropped a couple of $100K, and now he's ripe for the picking. Should you do a TDK to Cherry? Look, it might not be the most critical trade for you for the week, but if you're already a Busslinger owner and you're looking at options going, there's just not much I love that's going to A, improve my team scoring, B, improve my team value. And I just feel like I'll make a nothing trade. I think if we're all honest with ourselves, if we went from round 8 to round 24, who scores more between TDK and Tristan? I think 99% of us are heading towards Tristan Cherry, and the other 1% just don't want to think about it as a trade. Is it an every team move? No, of course not. That's the whole premise of giving you 10 trade options. For 52% of the comp, you're like, oh, we know Tristan's a great buy low option, and we've been stuck with it. I get it. Just saying, for the 48% of coaches that don't have Tristan, X is in a great spot for you to be able to pick him up if it suits your team's moves. My number 5 trade target to round out my top 5 is Christian Petracca. I thought he was fine on the weekend, just gone. I thought he was fine. He was certainly one of the key reasons why they beat Richmond and beat them quite well in the end. An average of 94 now is well above what his break even is. Still under 20%. Under 20% of teams own him right now at time of recording. Over 900,000. I think from here to the end of the year, he's going to probably deliver around about that sort of 95 sort of range. So getting close to priced at what I think he'll deliver. But what you do have as an appeal this week is a couple of things. One is a great matchup against West Coast this week, I think, which is really favourable. And you always, when you're trading into an upgrade option, you always want to get a gravy hit on that first week, and he's definitely got that from a fixture perspective. The second thing is, again, there's a perfect timing scenario here for coaches that potentially are running a Davidson at F6. Maybe you want to get out of Ryan Marich a couple of weeks ahead of maybe where I'd probably prefer to. But again, the timing of the upgrade is just as important as the timing of getting off a player. So if you want the hit of Petracca having a really good matchup against West Coast, who I thought were fine on Sunday, but it's hard for these young and developing teams to back it up week in, week out for full games. I just think he could have another nice, handy victory. So those are my top 5 trade targets: Busslinger, Sheezel, Nasiah Wanganeen-Milera, Cherry, and Petracca. But do you need me to get a little bit more adventurous for you to find some other diverging pathways? All right, let's have a go. How about a Nic Martin at my number 6 spot? Wasn't quite as big last week on Anzac Day, but I think there's some explainable reasons for it. Number one is if you actually start using some of the DVP data, that is defense versus position, or basically what a player in a position on their team is doing against an opponent, you actually see Collingwood is not the easiest to score against in a couple of positions. I think when you throw the fact in that it was quite wet on the weekend, and Collingwood really maintained possession of the ball incredibly well on Anzac Day, it's no surprise to me that we saw a score of the 70 range from a Nic Martin. That said, the fixture's still very good from now till the bye. And I think if you want that positional flexibility at either end of the ground to upgrade, to play the rookie roulette of who's got the better matchup on paper for at least the next couple of weeks, it's fine. To me, he's going to be right towards that top 5 to 6 forwards, and I think he's got the potential to knock on the door of the top 10 defenders. But when you put those two superpowers together, it does make him incredibly appetizing as a selection. Still under 10% ownership across the comp. I think his break even of 111 is more than attainable. I'm pretty happy to get my hands on him. I know if you got him 2 weeks ago, it would have been ideal, but I do think some people misread what we saw last week on Anzac Day against the Pies, take it too far to the extremes and fade him, and others the week prior probably took it to the extremes, and the truth often is somewhere in the middle, if we're honest. So if he's not a 70s and he's not a 120s every week, where is he? He's probably basically a 100 guy. And I think I'd be happily to take a guy that's going to be a 100 guy for the rest of the year with that really nice fixture. I'm happy to take him in that spot. My number 7 trade target for the week is someone that I think has snuck under the radar from us this year. And if we're all honest, we would have loved to have picked him. If we knew what we knew now 8 weeks ago, we would have all picked this guy because he's bumped up serious cash and scoring incredibly well. We do have to talk about him and give him some flowers. Jake Bowie deserves some credit. Still, he's under 900,000, got a break even of 57 and got an average of 97. So what we're looking for with our upgrades at this time of the season is a number of things. We're looking for a guy that's got scoring potential, and he's shown that he's got that as recently as last week. Absolutely knocking it out with ceiling, and he's got great consistency to go with it. But we're also looking for a guy that's not only got scoring, ceiling, and capacity, we're looking for someone that offers some value to us to be able to increase that team value, to be able to maximize the usage of the dollars we are spending with upgrades, and gives us that outlet option that as we get towards the mid-season buys, as we get out of them and in towards a more luxury trade season rather than trying to complete our teams, moves like this to a Bowie just make a bunch of sense to us. He's probably one of the leading contenders for the halfback spot in the All-Australian team. So it's not just looking from a fantasy lens. They're getting the ball in his hands. Melbourne have adjusted the way they're moving the ball, and it is different to what I've seen over these last couple of weeks compared to the first few weeks of the year. Look, it's not an every person move, and when you get the opportunity to get into the Sheezels or the Wanganeen-Mileras or the Zorkos, I understand the appeal, but maybe if you're shopping on a little bit of a budget, Bowie could be your guy. I like it. We put Trent Rivers on the radar of the trade targets this time last week. It's time to give Jake some flowers. Is he an every team move? No, of course he's not. But if you want someone that's shown that 90 plus is well and truly within their capacity, that's got ceiling about them and is offering you some perceived and probably very, very real value, then we probably need to put Jake Bowie in that spot. Then my last 3 guys, again, we talk about a guy that probably should be getting more love in the community that he is. As a guy I've had in my team for a little bit now, and I think it's worthwhile making sure that you go, look, if you haven't missed him, is probably the key phrase. A week ago would have been better. A week before that would have been even better. And 3 weeks ago would have been prime time. But we do need to talk about my number 8 trade target this week, Ned Long. A month ago, I was skeptical, not going to lie, about him. It was, well, hang on a sec, there's no Houston, there's no DeGoey, and he's getting limited opportunities in this narrow period of time, and he's going to do okay, but it's for a short period of time. Well, he's done so well that it's forced drastic change in this midfield, so that despite him initially only getting an opportunity due to injuries and suspensions through the team, he's now very much solidified, at least for the next month in my eyes, as long as he keeps performing. He's in this best mix now for the Collingwood midfield. A break even of 33, just giving the fact that that average is really damning, that you see it's actually close to that sort of 80s, 90s plus is what he's really doing when you take those vest affected games out. So to get a guy mid 600s that can pop 90s for you, I think you should be pretty happy with it. And again, maybe it's because you're like, I've already got Busslinger. I don't like any of the other rookies. I'm just trying to keep the cash moving and looking at creative ways. Well, a pivot over from a Davidson type to a Long will certainly keep that cash generation going. Maybe you want to jump out of somebody else and get into that. There's absolutely multiple ways to do it. Again, it's later than I would normally advocate for somebody, but the fact is, under $300,000 players that I'm confident we're going to see this week, let alone in 2 weeks' time, is very, very narrow. We need to start finding unique ways of generating cash without destroying our bench depth and bench hygiene. A player like Ned would have been perfect 3 weeks ago, was even fine last week, and I think it's okay for you this week, but it's probably the last week you can jump into him. Let me give you my last 2 players as trade targets this week. Maybe you don't want to get into Tristan Cherry. Maybe you don't want to make any ruck move at that upper end because you still think there's the ruck that you'd really prefer to get is Rowan Marshall. He's my number 9 trade target this week. Another ton just on this weekend gone, but he's almost 900,000. He has dropped some significant cash, and with a break even of 130, you could argue there's a little more to come. But what I like about him is I look at this fixture over the next couple of weeks, and I do start to see some positive matchups that I think he could really monopolise in. He's got Fremantle this week. I think he could outwork Shrek around the ground, even with the returning Luke Jackson. Carlton against Tom de Koning, who's looking a little sore. I could see him absolutely knock it out with him. Then you've got West Coast. That's a great matchup. Gold Coast is a little tricky. Melbourne's a little tricky. But then out of the buys, you start to see it open up again. So a guy that's got back-to-back years of going 110 plus for us in AFL Fantasy at nearly 900,000, I do find that as pretty darn good value. Now, do you choose a Cherry over him? Probably, I think a lot of people do, given the fact that, what are we talking about, 40,000 more? I think the history of this year alone would give us a bit more confidence that maybe that's the pathway. But maybe you're a Cherry owner and you're like, oh, don't want to pay up for Gawn. English feels too risky, and TDK is not looking awesome, although he played well on the weekend. I'll give him some credit for that. Maybe you're just like, I just want something. Romar's your guy. I think we might see him return a little bit closer to what he's normally going to be. And then my number 10 trade target for the week. For the first time ever, I'm going to give you a player that is yet to debut. To me, Josh Smiley, we need to put in the trade targets. Because when we're looking at players that are under this sort of $350,000 price range, which is historically we're going to say are our rookie picks or our cash cows, and then obviously anything over that, we're talking about breakouts, we're talking about streamers that are mid-price and all this sort of territory. But Smiley's yet to debut. He's had a couple of games in the VFL. And the reason I want to put Josh on the radar for us is when we talk about downgrading, we don't just want to downgrade good scoring rooks into bad scoring and low job security rookies. unless you're using it tactically as a red dot because of some other different ideologies you've got, which I think is absolutely a viable play, we do want to be looking at trading into players that, yes, have scoring pedigree, but even more important than that is job security, because it don't care how good your scoring is in AFL fantasy. If you are not playing, you are not making cash or having the opportunity to generate cash, which is why for me, a Josh Smiley is my number 10 trade target. A break even of 35 is no certainty, especially if he's handed a green or a red vest. But at 322,000, a top tier pick last year in the draft, who at one time was a consensus number 1 pick in a pretty even draft where almost anyone in the top 10 now felt like the number 1 pick off most people's draft boards. But I like Josh because he's building in the VFL. I could see him actually starting his career in the AFL system a little bit off the ball as a halfback flank and then pinch hitting through the midfield. We don't see Lawler spending a heap of time inside midfield at stoppages and clearance opportunities. It's more the forward than pushing up in and around. I think they might do the inverse of that with Smiley. He's a good user of the ball, strong hands, a really big body. I feel like he will impose a lot of other teams' half forwards. And I don't mind him as a downgrade option if he gets named this week. Again, there's every chance he's a vest. For sure. There's every chance he's another week away as they build his confidence back in his body after an injury-interrupted preseason. But if you're looking to downgrade to someone that will get at least, if they're fit, another 10 to 12 games for the rest of the year, then under that $350,000 price range, I don't think there's any better options than Josh Smiley. So put him on your trade target, whether it's this week or next, depending on when he gets named. I'm actually pretty happy to go there. I don't expect him to be a massive scorer. I think it'll be similar lenses, if not marginally lower than what his fellow Cub in Lawler has done. But in a year where we're looking at the rooks going, don't love that, don't love that, don't love that, this might be the best long-term job security option that we've got. So those are my top 10 trade targets. But I want to know from you, what are the moves you're making this week in AFL Fantasy? Why don't you comment below and let me know the top moves you're planning on making in AFL Fantasy. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you do so. If you haven't liked this video, make sure you do, especially if I've named one of the players that you're planning on trading into this week. And don't forget to turn notifications on, because as soon as a video drops here on the channel, you get notified straight on your device. Inside the description of this episode is where you can get in touch and follow us across social media. Hey, you can get some hands on some Coaches Panel merch. You look good and you support Coaches Panel in doing so. And you could become part of our Patreon and get yourself some extra bonus content as well as support us. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back with you real soon talking all things fantasy footy.